Evelyn, he began, his voice a hoarse whisper, raw with a counterfeit remorse I would only later recognize. Sit down, please. There's something we need to tell you. The silence in my living room was the first alarm bell. Not a comfortable, companionable silence, but the thick, cloying kind that precedes a storm or a verdict. I'd walked in from a grueling day at the architecture firm, briefcase still in hand, expecting the usual Tuesday evening routine. Mark channel surfing, the low hum of the TV, the scent of whatever takeout he'd decided on. Instead, I found him perched on the edge of our custom-made linen sofa. My custom-made sofa, if I were being scrupulously honest, looking like a man about to face a firing squad. Beside him, curled into a ball of feigned fragility, was my younger sister, Isabel. Izzy. Her usually artfully tousled blonde hair was authentically dishevelled, her mascara smudged beneath wide, tear-filled blue eyes that were fixed on her lap. Her hands were protectively, almost theatrically, cradling her stomach. My stomach plummeted. Mark! Izzy! What's going on? Is everything okay? My voice sounded unnaturally loud in the oppressive quiet. Mark swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing convulsively. He couldn't meet my eyes. Izzy let out a small hiccuping sob. Evelyn, Mark began, his voice a hoarse whisper, raw with a counterfeit remorse I would only later recognize. Sit down, please. There's something we need to tell you. I remained standing, a sudden, icy premonition gripping me. Tell me what, Mark? He finally dragged his gaze up to meet mine, and what I saw there, a wretched cocktail of guilt, fear, and a bizarre undercurrent of something almost defiant, made my blood run cold. It's Izzy, he stammered, gesturing vaguely towards my sister. She's, Evelyn, Izzy's pregnant. The words hung in the air, heavy and surreal. Pregnant, my baby sister. A flicker of confused concern, then a dawning, horrifying suspicion. Why were they telling me this, together with this funereal atmosphere? Mark didn't let the silence stretch. He ploughed on, the words tumbling out in a torrent of self-flagellation. And, God, Evelyn, I'm so sorry. I don't know how this happened. It was a mistake, a terrible, unforgivable mistake. But I'm the father. The floor seemed to drop out from beneath me. My briefcase slipped from my numb fingers, thudding heavily onto the polished oak floorboards. My floorboards. The sound echoed in the suddenly cavernous space of my own living room. Mark, Izzy, a baby. The three phrases collided in my mind, creating an explosion of disbelief and a pain so sharp, so visceral it stole my breath. My husband, my sister. The cracks in my 7-year marriage to Mark Hayes hadn't appeared overnight. They'd been subtle hairline fractures at first, easily dismissed, papered over with busy schedules and the comfortable illusions of shared history. He'd become increasingly distant over the past year, a gradual emotional withdrawal I'd initially attributed to stress from his struggling tech startup. The late nights at the office had become more frequent, his explanations vague, hushed phone calls he'd take in the other room, snapping his phone shut if I walked in unexpectedly. My attempts to connect, to talk about what was happening between us, were met with a weary defensiveness, a plea for space. I'd suspected an affair, of course. The signs were classic, almost cliché. I'd even steeled myself for that eventual gut-wrenching confession. But this was a betrayal on a scale I couldn't have fathomed in my darkest nightmares. This wasn't just infidelity. This was a wrecking ball to the very foundations of my life, wielded by the two people, besides my parents, I should have been able to trust implicitly. Izzy, my baby sister, 5 years my junior. The one I'd practically raised after our mother went back to work full-time. the one whose scraped knees I'd bandaged, whose teenage dramas I'd patiently listened to, whose often questionable boyfriends I'd politely tolerated. The one I'd helped financially more times than I could count, bailing her out of ill-advised ventures or overdue rent. That she could do this to me. It was unthinkable. Now, Izzy lifted her tear-streaked face, her blue eyes, so like our mother's, usually sparkling with a mischievous, almost childlike charm, swimming with what looked like genuine anguish. "Evie," she whispered, using my childhood nickname, a deliberate twist of the knife. "I'm so sorry. We never meant for this to happen. It was just once. A stupid, terrible mistake after that gallery opening downtown. We both had too much to drink." Her voice broke on a perfectly timed sob. "I didn't want to hurt you. You have to believe me. But I can't. I can't deny this baby its father. It wouldn't be right." Mark nodded miserably, his face a mask of shame. "She's right, Evelyn. It's my responsibility. I have to do the right thing. For the baby." He reached out and tentatively placed a hand on Izzy's shoulder, a gesture of solidarity that sent another shard of ice through my heart. They spoke of responsibility, of doing the right thing, as if these were noble concepts they had suddenly discovered, conveniently forgetting the wreckage their actions had created. And the implication, hanging heavy and unspoken in the air, was clear. I was the obstacle. I was the one standing in the way of their new impromptu family. Then Izzy, with an artless glance around my beautifully decorated living room, the room I'd spent months designing, selecting every piece of furniture, every swatch of fabric, delivered the tacit eviction notice. It's probably best for the baby to be raised here, don't you think, Mark? In a stable home, with both its parents. Her eyes flickered towards me, a fleeting, almost pitying look. I felt like I was drowning, suffocating in the sheer audacity of their betrayal. The walls of my carefully constructed life were caving in around me. My first instinct was pure, primal flight. I couldn't breathe the same air as them. I couldn't bear to look at their faces, etched with a grotesque pantomime of remorse and burgeoning new loyalties. I need to go," I managed to choke out, stumbling backwards towards the front door. I'll go to Laura's." Laura, my best friend since college, my rock. Neither of them tried to stop me. Mark just nodded mutely, his gaze fixed on the expensive Persian rug at his feet, another one of my purchases. Izzy offered another watery, apologetic smile. I fled my own home that night, a refugee from a war I hadn't even known was being waged against me. The drive to Laura's apartment was a blur of tears and fractured, incoherent thoughts. When she opened the door to find me, pale and trembling on her doorstep, she took one look at my face and pulled me into a fierce hug, no questions asked. The days that followed were a fog of grief, disbelief, and a rage so profound it left me physically shaking. Laura was a saint. She listened, she let me cry, she made endless cups of tea, and she cursed Mark and Izzy with a vehemence that was both terrifying and deeply comforting. She was a litigator, sharp and pragmatic, and her righteous anger on my behalf was a lifeline in the churning sea of my emotions. Slowly, as the initial shock began to recede, replaced by a dull, throbbing ache, the questions started. Little inconsistencies, nagging doubts began to surface from the depths of my memory, like debris floating up from a shipwreck. Izzy's pregnancy announcement had felt staged, overly dramatic even for her, and Izzy had always possessed a flair for the theatrical. She'd been the star of every high school play, the queen of manufactured crises that usually ended with someone else, often me, picking up the pieces. Could this be another, albeit infinitely more monstrous performance? I remembered a family BBQ just a few weeks before the bombshell. Izzy, who had recently been making a big show of cutting back on alcohol for health reasons, had been subtly refusing wine, which I'd chalked up to her latest wellness kick. But then, later in the evening, I'd seen her laughing with a cousin, a half-empty glass of rosé in her hand. At the time, it hadn't registered. Now, it felt like a glaring red flag. Her answers about doctor's appointments, when I'd numbly called a few days after the announcement to make a feeble attempt at showing sisterly concern, had been vague, evasive. "Oh, just the usual," she'd said airily. "Everything's fine." No details, no excited chatter about sonograms or due dates. And her morning sickness? It seemed to flare up with convenient timing, usually when I was present or when difficult questions about the future were broached. But Laura, who had bumped into Izzy at a coffee shop one morning, reported she'd looked perfectly fine, happily munching on a croissant. Mark's behaviour too felt off. His guilt seemed genuine enough, but there was an almost unseemly haste in his acceptance of this new reality, his eagerness to dismantle our life together and embrace this new responsibility. He'd always been somewhat weak-willed, easily influenced especially by a pretty face and a damsel in distress act. Had Izzy played him as expertly as she was trying to play me? The more I thought about it, the more the pieces refused to fit. A tiny, insistent voice in the back of my mind whispered, "This isn't real. Something is very, very wrong." While I was holed up at Laura's, trying to piece together my shattered psyche, Mark and Izzy were apparently wasting no time settling into their new life in my house. Mark called me once, his voice strained. "Evelyn, I've started packing up some of your things from the spare room. Just the non-essentials. Izzy needs the space. For the nursery. We thought it would be best." My things. My spare room, which I'd painstakingly converted into a serene yoga and meditation space. Now destined to be a nursery for a baby conceived in an act of profound betrayal. The casual entitlement, the utter lack of consideration for my feelings, was breathtaking. Izzy, I heard through a reluctant update from my shell-shocked mother, was already talking about paint colours and cribs, sending Mark links to expensive baby gear. They were acting as if I were already a ghost, a forgotten chapter in the story of their new, loving family. "You can't let them do this, Ev," Laura said one evening, her voice sharp with anger as I recounted Mark's latest call. "You can't let them just erase you from your own life, from your own home. There's something rotten about this whole situation. That sister of yours, I've never trusted her. She's always had a jealous streak when it comes to you, your career, your marriage." Laura was right. Izzy had always been competitive. Beneath the bubbly, baby sister facade, there had always been a current of envy, a subtle resentment of my achievements, my stability. She'd flitted from one dead-end job to another, one disastrous relationship to the next, while I'd steadily built my career, my marriage, my home. Had that envy finally curdled into something so toxic, so destructive? The suspicion, once planted, took root and grew, fueled by Laura's pragmatic outrage and my own returning sense of self-preservation. The grief was still there, a heavy stone in my chest, but now it was mixed with a cold, potent anger. I would not be played for a fool. I would not be driven from my own home, my own life, by their lies and manipulations. "I need to know the truth, Laura," I said, a new resolve hardening my voice. "Whatever it is." "Then you need to find out," she replied simply. "Hire someone. A private investigator, discreetly." The thought felt sordid, a betrayal of the family I once believed I had. But the alternative, allowing their deception to stand, to lose everything based on a lie, was far worse. The next day, I contacted a reputable private investigation agency Laura recommended, I met with a discreet, professional woman named Ms. Davies, laid out my suspicions, and authorised her to look into Izzy's recent activities, specifically anything related to a pregnancy. Simultaneously, on Laura's strong advice, I scheduled a consultation with a top-tier divorce attorney. If this was war, I needed to arm myself. The wait for Ms. Davies' report was agonising. Every phone call made my heart leap. Every email notification sent a jolt of anxiety through me. I tried to focus on my work, but my mind was a constant maelstrom of what-ifs. The report landed in my inbox a week later, a concise, chilling PDF document. My hands trembled as I opened it. The findings were damning. Ms. Davies had found no record of Izzy Vance attending any appointments at any OB/GYN clinics or hospitals in the city or surrounding counties in the past 3 months. There were no prescriptions for prenatal vitamins filled under her name. Instead, there were ATM surveillance photos of Izzy at a trendy downtown bar with a group of friends on 3 separate occasions in the past month, clearly consuming alcoholic beverages. A far cry from the abstemious, health-conscious, expectant mother she was pretending to be. On one of those nights, she had claimed to be home, suffering from debilitating, pregnancy-related fatigue. The final, irrefutable nail in the coffin of her lie was a series of recovered text messages from a cloud backup of Izzy's old phone, a detail Ms. Davies' tech expert had managed to unearth. In a conversation with a close friend, dated just 2 weeks before the bombshell announcement, Izzy had written, "Mark is so gullible. He'll believe anything if you cry enough. This baby is my ticket to finally getting everything Evie has. That house, the lifestyle, he'll leave her for me, you'll see. Just need to keep up the act for a few more months. Bought the most realistic fake bump online today. LOL. I stared at the words, a cold fury washing over me, so intense it momentarily eclipsed the pain. A fake bump. A calculated, cold-blooded deception designed to steal my husband, my home, my life. The sheer, premeditated cruelty of it was staggering. But as the rage subsided, a strange sense of vindication settled in. My gut feeling had been right. I wasn't going crazy. I was being systematically gaslit by my own sister and the man I had once loved. And then, a crucial memory surfaced, an ace I'd held so long I'd almost forgotten its power. The house, our beautiful 3-story Victorian in the desirable Queen Anne neighbourhood. Mark and Izzy had so arrogantly assumed it would be theirs, the cosy nest for their fraudulent family. They had forgotten, or perhaps, in Mark's case, conveniently chosen to ignore, a rather significant detail. The house was solely, unequivocally, in my name. I had purchased it 5 years before I even met Mark, using a substantial inheritance from my grandmother and my own considerable savings from my burgeoning architectural career. Mark had moved in after we got married. He contributed to the monthly mortgage payments, yes, as agreed, but his name was nowhere on the deed, nowhere on the original purchase agreement. It was my asset, legally and morally. A slow, cold smile spread across my face. The game had just changed. Dramatically. I didn't call Mark, I didn't call Izzy, I didn't give them any warning. Armed with Ms. Davies' meticulously documented report and a certified copy of the deed to my house, I drove home. To my home. It was a Saturday afternoon. I used my key. The key they hadn't thought to demand back, so confident were they in my cowed departure, and let myself in. They were in the living room, the picture of domestic bliss, if domestic bliss involved deceit and stolen lives. Izzy was reclining on the sofa, one hand resting on her, presumably padded stomach, dramatically sighing as she flipped through a glossy parenting magazine. Mark was kneeling beside her, offering her a glass of what looked like organic juice, his face a mask of solicitous concern. The scene was so grotesquely staged it almost made me laugh. They looked up as I walked in, their faces registering shock, then a dawning unease at the icy composure I projected. "Evelyn," Mark stammered, scrambling to his feet. What are you doing here? You thought I'd just disappear." I finished for him, my voice dangerously quiet, that I'd meekly surrender my home, my life, based on your unfortunate situation. Izzy sat up, her eyes wide with a theatrical innocence that no longer fooled me. "Evie, we were just talking about the nursery colours." "Were you?" I said, walking further into the room, placing my handbag and a thick manila envelope on the coffee table. "Well, before you get too attached to any particular shade of yellow, Izzy, there are a few things we need to discuss." I opened the envelope and laid out Ms. Davies's report, page by damning page, the surveillance photos of Izzy drinking cocktails, the absence of any medical records confirming a pregnancy, and finally, the printouts of her text messages, her gloating confession of the fake belly and her calculated plot. I watched, with a detached clinical interest, as Izzy's carefully constructed facade crumbled. Her face went from feigned concern to disbelief, then to stark, unadulterated panic as she saw the text messages. She tried to deny it, to bluster, to cry real tears of outrage this time. This is fake. You're trying to trick me. Mark, don't believe her." But the evidence was irrefutable. Mark stared at the texts, his face paling, his eyes darting between a genuinely distraught Izzy and me, his expression a mixture of confusion and dawning horror. He looked like a man who had backed the wrong horse in spectacular fashion. "Izzy," he whispered, his voice barely audible. Is this true?" Izzy finally broke, dissolving into a heap of genuine hysterical sobs. I wanted..." She choked out between gasps, her confession lost in a torrent of self-pity. When the storm of Izzy's confession finally subsided, leaving her a snivelling, mascara-streaked mess on my sofa, I delivered the coup de grace. "And as for this house," I said, my voice like ice, "the house you both so comfortably assumed would be the backdrop for your new family. The house you, Mark, so thoughtfully started packing my belongings away from." I picked up the certified copy of the deed from the envelope and held it up. "It seems you both overlooked a rather critical detail in your planning." I let my gaze linger on Mark. "My name, Evelyn Hayes, née Evelyn Walker, is the only name on this deed. I purchased this property with my own funds, years before you and I were married, Mark. Your name appears nowhere on it. Legally, this house is mine, solely and completely mine." The colour drained from Mark's face. He looked utterly poleaxed. Izzy stared at the deed as if it were a death warrant. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by Izzy's ragged breathing. "So here's what is going to happen," I continued, my voice unwavering. "Izzy, you have exactly 1 hour to pack a small bag with your essentials and get out of my house. Mark, you can accompany her, or you can find alternative accommodation elsewhere. But you are both leaving these premises today. My lawyer will be filing divorce papers first thing Monday morning. And Mark," I added, allowing a shard of the ice in my voice to convey the full extent of my contempt, "given your active participation in this fraudulent scheme to deprive me of my assets, rest assured that my lawyer and I will be scrutinising every aspect of our marital property with extreme prejudice. You will not profit from this betrayal." The eviction was as messy and humiliating for them as I'd intended. Izzy, stripped of her primary leverage, the fictitious baby, was a pathetic, blubbering wreck. She tried pleading, then threatening, then resorting to more tears, but I remained unmoved. Mark caught between the sister, whose lies had spectacularly imploded, and the wife he had so grievously wronged, seemed to shrink before my eyes. He mumbled a few incoherent apologies, which I ignored. Laura arrived, as prearranged, to act as a witness and provide moral support, and, I suspected, a healthy dose of righteous satisfaction. She watched, arms crossed, as Izzy hastily threw a few clothes into an overnight bag, her movements jerky and uncoordinated. Mark just stood there, looking lost and utterly defeated, like a chess player who had just realised he'd been checkmated from the opening move. Within the hour, they were gone. I stood at my living room window and watched them trudge down the front steps, Izzy leaning heavily on Mark, no longer the radiant, expectant mother, but a deflated, exposed fraud. The sight brought me no joy, only a profound, weary sadness for the relationships that had been irrevocably destroyed by their greed and deceit. The aftermath was predictably tumultuous. My parents were horrified, oscillating between disbelief at Izzy's deception and a misplaced desire to somehow fix things, to broker a peace I had no interest in. I made it clear, in no uncertain terms, that my relationship with Izzy was over and my marriage to Mark was ending. There would be no reconciliation. The divorce proceedings were surprisingly swift. My lawyer was formidable. The pre-existing sole ownership of the house, coupled with the clear evidence of Mark's complicity in Izzy's fraudulent scheme, left him with very little legal standing to contest my claims. He walked away with his personal belongings and a significantly diminished sense of self-worth. The house, my sanctuary, remained mine, untainted by his claims. Izzy finally broke, dissolving into a heap of genuine hysterical sobs. I wanted... She choked out between gasps, her confession lost in a torrent of self-pity. When the storm of Izzy's confession finally subsided, leaving her a snivelling, mascara-streaked mess on my sofa, I delivered the coup de grace. And as for this house, I said, my voice like ice, the house you both so comfortably assumed would be the backdrop for your new family. The house you, Mark, so thoughtfully started packing my belongings away from. I picked up the certified copy of the deed from the envelope and held it up. It seems you both overlooked a rather critical detail in your planning. I let my gaze linger on Mark. My name, Evelyn Hayes, née Evelyn Walker, is the only name on this deed. I purchased this property with my own funds, years before you and I were married, Mark. Your name appears nowhere on it. Legally, this house is mine, solely and completely mine. The colour drained from Mark's face. He looked utterly poleaxed. Izzy stared at the deed as if it were a death warrant. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by Izzy's ragged breathing. So here's what is going to happen, I continued, my voice unwavering. Izzy, you have exactly 1 hour to pack a small bag with your essentials and get out of my house. Mark, you can accompany her, or you can find alternative accommodation elsewhere. But you are both leaving these premises today. My lawyer will be filing divorce papers first thing Monday morning. And Mark, I added, allowing a shard of the ice in my voice to convey the full extent of my contempt, given your active participation in this fraudulent scheme to deprive me of my assets, rest assured that my lawyer and I will be scrutinising every aspect of our marital property with extreme prejudice. You will not profit from this betrayal. The eviction was as messy and humiliating for them as I'd intended. Izzy, stripped of her primary leverage, the fictitious baby, was a pathetic, blubbering wreck. She tried pleading, then threatening, then resorting to more tears, but I remained unmoved. Mark, caught between the sister, whose lies had spectacularly imploded, and the wife he had so grievously wronged, seemed to shrink before my eyes. He mumbled a few incoherent apologies, which I ignored. Laura arrived, as prearranged, to act as a witness and provide moral support, and, I suspected, a healthy dose of righteous satisfaction. She watched, arms crossed, as Izzy hastily threw a few clothes into an overnight bag, her movements jerky and uncoordinated. Mark just stood there, looking lost and utterly defeated, like a chess player who had just realised he'd been checkmated from the opening move. Within the hour, they were gone. I stood at my living room window and watched them trudge down the front steps, Izzy leaning heavily on Mark, no longer the radiant, expectant mother, but a deflated, exposed fraud. The sight brought me no joy, only a profound, weary sadness for the relationships that had been irrevocably destroyed by their greed and deceit. Their aftermath was predictably tumultuous. My parents were horrified, oscillating between disbelief at Izzy's deception and a misplaced desire to somehow fix things, to broker a peace I had no interest in. I made it clear, in no uncertain terms, that my relationship with Izzy was over and my marriage to Mark was ending. There would be no reconciliation. The divorce proceedings were surprisingly swift. My lawyer was formidable. The pre-existing sole ownership of the house, coupled with the clear evidence of Mark's complicity in Izzy's fraudulent scheme, left him with very little legal standing to contest my claims. He walked away with his personal belongings and a significantly diminished sense of self-worth. The house, my sanctuary, remained mine, untainted by his claims. A year has passed. I am thriving. My architectural firm just landed a major new project. I've reconnected with old friends, travelled a little, rediscovered passions I'd let lie dormant. The divorce is final, a clean break. Izzy, I've heard through the family grapevine, is struggling. Her reputation is in tatters, her attempts to find a new Mark apparently unsuccessful. Last week, a thick handwritten letter arrived, addressed in her familiar loopy script. It was postmarked from a town I didn't recognise. Inside, pages and pages of rambling apologies, excuses and pleas for forgiveness. She claims she's learned her lesson, that she's seeing a therapist, and that she desperately wants to reconnect as sisters, to rebuild what we lost. The letter sits on my kitchen counter, unopened beyond the first few lines. Part of me, the part that still remembers a little girl with scraped knees and a gap-toothed smile, feels a flicker of something akin to pity. But the other part, the part that bears the scars of her calculated cruelty, is wary, sceptical. So, I ask you, what should Evelyn do with Izzy's letter? Read the letter fully. Agree to meet Izzy for a single supervised coffee in a public place to hear her out, believing that people can sometimes genuinely change. Offer forgiveness as a personal act of release, but make it clear that a full reconciliation or a return to trusting sisterhood is off the table, establishing ironclad emotional and financial boundaries. Beast. Leave the letter unread, or read it and then burn it. Ignore Izzy's attempt to reconnect completely. Conclude that her betrayal was too profound, the deception too calculated, and any attempt to re-engage would be a foolish risk to her hard-won peace, emotional well-being, and the sanctuary she has rebuilt for herself. Which path offers Evelyn the truest form of healing and closure?